Should members of the same gender be allowed to marry, raise children, and so on? My answer is that such a question is improper. It presumes that some people have the authority to reserve certain freedoms to themselves and deny them to others, which is repugnant to a free society. The question could be better phrased as, do members of the same gender have the right to marry, raise children, and so on? And of course my answer is yes, absolutely. Now let's examine this closely. Let's start by looking at how the concept comes about in modern-day Western society. A child is born, grows to adulthood, and goes out into the world to make a life. The young adult finds employment, a place to sleep and keep personal belongings, makes friends. Frequently, two friends will develop a close bond and wish to form a partnership. Together they become stronger than they were apart. They complement each other's strengths, care for each other in sickness, pool their income, purchase property, reproduce or adopt children and raise them, and so on. Sometimes 3 or more friends will discover their compatibilities, pool their income, purchase property, and so on, just as 2 friends would do. For now, let us consider the participants without regard to gender. At some point in the relationship, the partners desire to tell their friends and relations of their arrangement. They desire their partnership to be recognized, such that when an invitation to a social event is extended to one of them, it is understood that it is extended to all of them. For example, parties, picnics, concerts, and vacations are popular occasions for one set of partners to invite another set of partners to join them. What is the best way for them to announce their partnership? They have a big celebration and invite all their friends. They wear their best clothing, perform a ceremony, exchange gifts, wise elders make flowery speeches, and finish with music, dancing, and a feast. In other words, they have a wedding. Partnerships eventually dissolve due to a death or a breakup, and while such events are usually sad, friends come together, express condolences, and solemnly inform all acquaintances. What are the main concerns that typically accompany such a partnership? Joint ownership of property and joint custody of children. Should any dispute arise, it is best if a formal contract exists that can be respected and protected by law and enable disputes to be settled peacefully. The welfare of children in particular is of primary concern. Now let us consider number and gender. Obviously, the most frequent partnership is one male and one female, but humans come in all varieties. One's sexual preference and orientation does not always coincide with one's reproductive organs. Sometimes the physical attributes are missing or ambiguous. While such individuals appear to most of us as unusual, they are, of course, still human. It is becoming more and more clear that sexual preference and orientation is not always a choice. I certainly had no choice in selecting my male gender, and I don't think my heterosexuality was by choice either. They, along with my temperament and other predispositions, are things that I recognize I have little or no control over. They are what they are, and I do the best with what I've got. Some people get along well with more than one partner. It is rarely seen by those of us living in modern-day America, but is common within small clans and tribes such as the natives of some South Pacific islands. Mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, and nearly all other adults of the tribe participate in raising the tribe's children, and the family tree can get quite a muddle. The ancient belief that a woman can be impregnated by many men simultaneously, and that the child will inherit the strongest and healthiest traits of them all, results in a culture that accepts and encourages multiple partners. To those of us used to monogamous relationships, this concept is foreign, perhaps even repulsive, as it was to the European missionaries in the 1800s. But to the islanders, it was a normal way of life for thousands of years. Plural marriage, such as polygamy, many wives, is practiced in Utah and several Mideastern countries, and there are reports that polyandry, many husbands, though rare, can be found in the remote areas of India, Tibet, Nepal, and South America. There are records of a few short-lived group marriages in America. Should these unusual relationships be prevented because we find them to be strange? I'll get to that in a moment. For the last few centuries, the Western European civilizations have taught that the one-man and one-woman partnership is the only acceptable type. This view is typically promoted by the major religions and is often known as the traditional marriage and family unit. To avoid being labeled as unacceptable, those who don't fit in have tried to keep their secret to themselves and suffer the consequences of being outed. That is, the violence and discrimination of intolerant societies once the secret is known. For many, this secret lifestyle is equally unacceptable, so they have outed themselves in large numbers and requested that they be treated just like everyone else. Concerning inalienable rights, preventing any partnership based on sexual preference or orientation would require initiating physical force and would result in a violation. Thus, in a proper society, all peaceful partnerships would be respected and protected by law, no matter what our moral judgment of them might be. So, regardless of what sort of person you are or where in the world you live, we can conclude that there are essentially two parts to the equation: the friendly part and the legal part. First, choosing who you will associate with, the type and degree of the relationships, and the other friends and relations you wish to announce it to is a very private matter and is, I submit, deserving of the name marriage. Thus, in a proper society, everyone would be able to marry anyone they wished simply by announcing it to their friends, and it would be no one else's business. Likewise, dissolving a marriage would be done simply by the partners announcing it. If organized religions required their members to obtain approval from the church for their choice of partner, manner and location of the announcement, and expelled members who had announced their marriage or dissolution of marriage without the church's approval, the church would, of course, be free to do so. Likewise, any member who disliked the way in which their church or religion treated marriage would be free to switch to another more to their liking, or, as in my case, reject them all. Second, any legal contract that partners wish to create concerning the joint ownership of property and joint custody of children would be respected and protected by law. There are already many names in use for these types of contracts, such as civil union, civil partnership, registered partnership, domestic partnership, and so on. I submit that it should be called whatever keeps the lawyers happy, other than marriage. Before moving on, we must consider the possibility that someone might wish to marry one or more people and simultaneously have legal contracts with one or more entirely different people. I don't see any problem with that, but at the same time it is difficult to see any advantage. Most likely it would occur only during transition periods, that is, marriages would be created and dissolved at the time of the partner's choosing, and the negotiating and updating of legal contracts among the partners will be completed in due course. We essentially see this all the time. People cohabit with whomever they choose, whenever they choose, and keep their circle of friends and relations informed. The legal paperwork is often viewed as a nuisance and a burden on one's finances, and is avoided as long as possible. Now, how do other people's marriages affect me? When I see a group of strangers, I can't tell from looking at them if two or more are married. I suppose I could ask to examine their jewelry and look for wedding bands and so on, but does it concern me? No, not really. Is it any of my business? Certainly not. Is my traditional heterosexual marriage threatened in any way? Of course not. My marriage is none of their concern, and theirs is none of mine unless we choose it to be. Now, unfortunately, our civilization is far from ideal. Let us examine the most significant inequities in our system of law that have caused the issue of same-sex marriage to become so controversial. Social security, disability, welfare, medical benefits, and so on. Non-traditional partnerships have been ineligible to receive survivor social security benefits and are at a disadvantage when it comes to most other government-provided benefits. None of these would be an issue in a proper society, since there would be no mandatory savings and insurance plans and no entitlements of any kind. Everyone would be free to save their money and enroll in insurance plans, or not, as they saw fit. Veterans and military benefits. These are actually an additional form of pay for military service after one's tour of duty has been completed, and take into account one's dependent spouses and children. Non-traditional partnerships have been at a disadvantage. In a proper society, this form of pay would probably continue, but would have to be based not on marriage, but on the existence and content of domestic partnership contracts. Employment benefits. The laws currently coerce employers to pay for many benefits such as disability, unemployment, family leave, and bereavement compensation. The money for this is, of course, deducted from the employee's paycheck, even though it may not be listed on his paycheck stub, so the employee is likewise being coerced. Those in non-traditional partnerships are not always able to take advantage of the benefits for which they are forced to pay. In a proper society, there would be no such coercion, and employees would be free to enroll in such plans or not, as they chose. Private insurance. Many insurance companies currently favor traditional partnerships and traditional families and offer them lower rates. The rates are likewise lower for group insurance purchased by one's employer. In a proper society, insurance companies would, of course, be free to continue this practice, but I predict that they would eventually lose market share due to competition from those that offer more favorable rates to all types of partnerships. Taxation. Currently, those in a traditional partnership end up with a lower total tax burden. In a proper society, taxation would be recognized as a form of extortion and outlawed. All funding of government would be through voluntary contribution, most likely as a portion of one's Property Owners Association membership dues. One would therefore be free to rent or purchase real estate in areas where the prevailing contribution was most favorable. Legal fees for documents, power of attorney, healthcare decision-making, inheritance, estate planning, divorce, lawsuits, residency requirements, and so on. Currently, the legal procedures for a traditional partnership are simpler and with fewer roadblocks, and consequently require the least amount of work and associated expense. In a proper society, all the legal roadblocks would be removed, and we could expect to see the fees become more equitable. The law would recognize, enforce, and protect all legal contracts between individuals regardless of number, gender, and orientation, whereas marriage would be regarded as a private matter, unaffected by law, in the same manner as friends. Indeed, we could expect to see the word marriage and all variations stricken from the law books. Visitation in hospitals and prisons. Hospitals typically limit the number of visitors and visiting hours to minimize the chances of spreading germs and to promote a quiet and peaceful atmosphere for all patients. Frequently, a hospital will limit these visitors to spouses and their children. Prisons also usually limit visits to just spouses, and then only when the inmate has a record of good behavior. Currently, non-traditional partners are often excluded. The term spouse, if it is to continue to be used in a legal context, will have to refer to those with whom one has a legal contract. Adoption, step-parenting, foster care of children, and child custody in case of divorce. In a proper society, the only role of government would be to protect all individuals, including children, from physical force by others. There are a vast number of issues to consider, and I have addressed the most significant ones in the previous 4 videos. Suffice it to say that there is no evidence that non-traditional partners are any more inclined to violate the rights of children than traditional partners. Thus, the peaceful adoption and raising of children by any number and type of partners should be respected and protected by law. Should the same respect and protection be given to non-traditional partners who wish to produce and raise their own children via artificial insemination, surrogate mothers, and so on? Yes, certainly. Now, if a community really found non-traditional partnerships to be completely intolerable, they would be free to exclude them with voluntarily accepted deed restrictions, similar to the privatized zoning laws. Would communities that adopt an unpopular policy earn the disrespect of surrounding communities and see their property values fall? Very likely. Common law marriage. This is a situation where the law, in some jurisdictions, treats partners as though they had a legal contract, even though none exists. Typically, this occurs when partners have lived together, shared property, and raised children for many years with no written agreement. If this practice is to continue, should it also include non-traditional partners? Yes, absolutely. To conclude, the familiar phrase, "By the power vested in me by your state, I now pronounce you husband and wife," is no longer a one-size-fits-all expression. In my view, there is no need to pretend that there is any power vested in anyone by anything. Instead, you would simply ask someone you liked to give a nice speech in a loud voice for all your friends and relations to hear that included something like, "Congratulations to the newlyweds." And this would be sufficient to publicly acknowledge the partnership. At roughly the same time, and assuming you were wise enough to plan ahead for any possible disputes concerning property or children, you would draw up a contract with the names and signatures of the participants and send it in to the appropriate government office, and that would take care of it without any fuss about gender or sexual preferences. What I hope you got from this video is that the principle of inalienable rights applies to all humans, regardless of their sexual preferences or practices, and that a free society requires that the right of every individual to choose whom to marry and with whom to establish legal contracts must be recognized and respected. Period.